This is the beginning of a backpacking trip, and it's no ordinary trek.
Not like a backpack like yours. Yeah, and I did load it up with quite a...
It's 489 miles from here to Durango on the Colorado Trail, and we're ready to begin. Let's go, guys!
We started by hiking up Waterton Canyon, a flat, easy, 6-mile dirt road that followed a river. The easy terrain didn't last long as we started climbing up into the Rockies.
Well, this is our first switchback. I'm sure we have a whole lot more to go.
Our first day was long and hot as our bodies adjusted to the rigors of backpacking, but it felt wonderful to walk through the wilderness enjoying the smell of the woods and the freedom of the trail. Icy cold water was just the kind of refreshment we needed at the end of the day. Shortly into the trip, we experienced our first thunderstorm. Daryl had gotten this advice from an experienced hiker.
We're going to stay under Douglas fir as opposed to ponderosa pine because we heard that ponderosa pine seems to attract lightning.
Lightning's flashing. Thunder's rumbling all around. We still got about 4 miles to get to the first place where we can take shelter. Hopefully we can make it before it gets too bad.
We had a lovely night camping, except for the kids' usual bickering.
I didn't steal your water.
Yes, you did.
And you lost a sock in like 2 days of hiking.
So at least I didn't knock over 4 bowls, and after stealing someone else's water.
Well, the 4 bowls can be cleaned. Your sock cannot be recovered.
Sure it can. You go to the REI.
That's still not your sock that's recovered.
After we buy it, it will be.
But it's still not recovered.
After 1 week and 50 miles, disaster struck.
This is the end of the road for me. I do okay on the uphills and the flats. But when I come down, my hip is really hurting. And anymore it's starting to buckle, and I never know if it's going to hold or not. I don't know how I'm going to get out from here. We've got about 8 more miles. I'll try to do it tomorrow.
We sadly went to sleep that night knowing tomorrow would be Nancy's last day on the trail. The next day we hiked to a campground from where Nancy would hitchhike out. She would rent a car and meet us somewhere down the road. So the 3 boys said goodbye to Mom and headed off into the wilderness.
Bye, Mom!
Bye!
We're gonna miss you! Off into the wilderness!
Not only would we miss Nancy's companionship, we would miss her great cooking. I shudder to think what the kids will now cook for me. Our diet consisted mostly of dried food, which we sent in these boxes to post offices close to the trail. We ate mainly rice, beans, oatmeal, and couscous. Dried vegetables, powdered mixes, and raisins gave flavor and vitamins to these dishes.
What you cooking, David?
Quaker oatmeal, milk, and apricots.
What are we having for dinner tonight, David?
Rice, weenies, vegetables, and bouillon cubes.
Do you have the right amount of water in the pot?
I don't know, they didn't come with directions.
Daryl, being Daryl, decided to leave the bowls with Nancy so he would have less dishes to wash.
Today we're going to cross Georgia Pass, which has an elevation of 11,874 feet.
Climbing above the tree line, we encountered our first snow, and, boys being boys, it was time to play.
We're almost to the top of Georgia Pass. You can see Mount Guyot behind me.
A cold wind was battering us, and being at 12,000 feet in altitude, it was difficult to breathe as we were nowhere near acclimatized. But it was a beautiful day, and the views were stunning. With all the hiking we did, we needed to drink large amounts of water. We took turns filtering the water from the cool, clear streams that abound in the mountains.
Our only source of water are these streams, and we have to filter all the giardia and bacteria and viruses out of them to make it safe for drinking.
After a freezing night, it was time to climb to another challenge.
Today we're going to climb Copper Mountain. Want to see what it's like to climb a 12,400 foot peak? Follow us.
All of the dead trees you see behind me were killed by the mountain pine beetle. The Forest Service cut down most of them to prevent a forest fire.
The altitude is killing me. Gonna go really, really slow. Go 10 feet, stop, 10 feet, stop. I hope we make it to a campground tonight before it gets dark.
After a painfully slow climb to the top of Copper Mountain, we finally made it. And it's mostly downhill from here.
Finding the right camping spot was always a challenge. We couldn't get our all-important good night's sleep if our tents were on sloping ground, rocks, or lumps. Most of the time we could find suitable places, but other times we just had to deal with being uncomfortable. Nancy slept alone in her ultra lightweight but small tent. David slept alone in his luxurious two-person tent, while Daryl and I shared a somewhat cramped two-person tent. It was only a 6 or 7 mile hike off the main trail, so we couldn't pass it up. Mount Massive, part of a towering ridge which was home to several of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks, loomed above. It beckoned and pleaded to us, "Come climb me, and I will reward you." David and I started the long, arduous climb without Daryl. He chose to give up this climb rather than to put on sunscreen. There were several nearby forest fires, and from high above we could see the smoke-filled valleys below.
We're on top of Mount Massive,
It's 14,421 feet high.
and it's Colorado's second highest peak.
All the dust, sweat, and sunscreen combined to make us absolutely filthy. It was hard to take a bath in the frigid water, but we reluctantly forced ourselves to anyway.
Oh, that was cold!
The day-after-day routine of backpacking was beginning to get to the kids. They were a bit bored of getting up, walking all day, only to set up camp, eat, and go to bed. After a month of doing this, the adventure wasn't quite as stimulating as it was when we started. One day was particularly hard. We hiked 18 miles through mountainous terrain that only a few weeks before experienced 120-mile-an-hour winds. There were many trees which fell across the trail, which took lots of energy to go over or around. At the end of this day, it was windy, cold, and it started to rain. Nancy met us at the end of the trail in a rented car. We sat in the car and watched it rain. We dreaded setting up our tents and started discussing options. We decided after hiking 200 miles to call it quits. Despite the trip prematurely ending, it was still definitely a worthwhile endeavor. Getting out into the wilderness where we could focus on nature and how we fit into it was a highlight. But even more importantly, we were able to focus on one another and what it means to be a family.